Let's start our look at Priority service management features by going into service contracts and creating a service contract record. There are three components to a service contract, the last two of which are optional. The first is controlling the renewal of that contract. The second covers the billing structures, and the third is a potential list of the items under contract. So if I want to go ahead and actually create a contract, I can drop in a customer and I can then specify, let's say, today's date as the effective date and potentially an expiry date as well. And the renewal option covers how often or up to what date the contract can be renewed prior to you having to do something to renew it again. So I'm going to say that in 2 years' time we must stop the automatic renewal. But we can say when it's paid up until. I'm going to bill it in a moment, so I'm not going to fill in the paid until details. The next part is to determine the billing profile. And there are two ways that you might do this. The simplest way is setting a billing structure against the contract as a whole. So we will have a look at that first, but then you'll see later that if alternatively you want a billing structure that relates to the items that you are supporting, then you have much more in-depth flexibility over the billing structure. We're going to go to the payment installments. Now, these payment installments can be created against an installment profile or could be created manually. I'm going to keep things very simple and create it manually. So we're saying that we are covering the date range of this year, if I can type the date correctly, and this is going to be a contract payment, and we want this to be $1,000. And that's as simple as it can be if you're going to bill relating to the contract as a whole. Once you're happy with that, you can actually prepare the invoice, and that will go ahead and create an invoice. Remembering that Priority's invoicing is a two-step process, so this is actually a preliminary invoice which needs finalizing. We can find the invoice down in this subform here, and we can drill into it to look at the detail on the invoice that got created. And from here, you can see it's a temporary invoice for $1,000. Once I'm happy with that, I can finalize and possibly print, or just finalize. I'm just going to finalize. We can look at printing in the receivables sections. So that is what will post the billing right the way through to the general ledger. Let's look at the other end of the scale of complexity. And in this case, we are dealing with the possibility of raising a service contract from a project. So assume for a moment that you have a project which you've completed, which is the sale and installation of a fire alarm system. And you can see on the project the list of items that were used on the project. Those are what will be transferred into the service contract. So if we select Open Service Contract, we can create a service contract from the project. As usual with Priority, we can drill into the record that got created by finding the relevant subform, which has got the details, in this case, service contracts for projects. So I can use the drill down to open up the service contract itself. So here's the service contract that got created from the project. Note in particular that we didn't have to create it from a project. We could have created it manually. You can see in this service contract all the parts that are going to be supported under the contract. So these are the items that were actually implemented during the project. If we go into any one in the list, you will see how we're going to price the contract, because there's a prorate charge which determines the unit cost of one console when it was sold to the customer, in other words $1,900, and a prorated charge on the service contract of 10%. So that suggests a charge of $190 a year for support or maintenance of this part. If we go back to the list of items under the contract, you'll see that the system has automatically picked up installation dates and warranty details from the originating project. And again, I repeat that if you didn't create this from project, you can enter the details manually. So I've now gone ahead and set the status of this service contract to approved so that I can move on to the billing. And in this more complex example, where we're actually pricing the contract based on a prorated charge of the items that we're supporting, I'm also going to show the slightly more complicated method than one invoice per year. And in this case, that is controlled by the payment frequency. And I'm going to set that to monthly. And as a result of having set the payment frequency, we can then run a program called Calculate Installments for this month. And that will go ahead and work out the installment. And as you can see, one installment has been created. If we go to the payment installments, you'll find the installment that actually got created. And we could drill into the item itself, but here you can see the amount of the contract. Then the final point that we'll pick up on service contracts at this stage is that we can determine the service terms. And if we look at the references, you can see that there's a service terms field. Let's actually drill into it so that you can follow what is involved in service terms. So what you can see is that for each type of service term you might select for a service contract, you can define whether components, specific families of items, are billable or not. So in this example, because this is saying that labor and parts for detectors and cameras are covered under the contract. However, the consumables like batteries are actually fully billable. So you can set any number of different product categories and whether they will be billable or not for the purposes of the service contract.